After having dealt with the 7 deadly sisters, by binding them and forcing them to dig the foundations of the temple, Solomon proceeds to glorify God and doesn't go about taking a break from his aggressive interviewing of the demons. He bade another demon to come forth to him, and there approaches a rather distinct, if not entirely creepy looking creature. It is human as far as Solomon can tell, although the most obvious thing about him is that he has no head. Solomon tells us, "And there was brought to me a demon having all the limbs of a man, but without a head." Solomon immediately intercepts the headless demon and demands to know who he is. The demon appears to be quite simple and maybe a little slow. He responds to Solomon's question saying, "I am a demon," and doesn't proceed to elaborate any further, perhaps genuinely believing his response was adequate enough. When Solomon prompts him for more, he explains, "I am called Envy, for I delight to devour heads, being desirous to secure for myself a head. But I do not eat enough, but am anxious to have such a head as thou hast." We can gather a lot from this admission here. Evidently, his name is Envy, and given that he longs for something he does not have himself, it is easy to identify him as a representation of envy itself. We see that he devours other people's heads because he himself cannot have one. That being a perfect example of envy, is that it can cause one to harbour resentful or even malicious feelings towards someone who has something that they do not. It can even cause one to ruin something that someone else has, much like the headless demon here does to those who have a head. Another idea is that envy is a stupid demon, or at least one who has a rather low intellect, and that he is not able to grasp the conceptualities or wonders of the world in the way that man or even his fellow demons can. And therefore, his longing to have a head is actually a longing to have a brain, or a high-functioning brain, so that he can perceive that which everyone else does. We've seen evidence of his simplicity already in the way he answers Solomon, saying, "I am a demon." His unwillingness to venture further on this might show his indifference to Solomon, but it might also be an indicator that he is not able to pick up social cues, or is unable to deliver an adequate response without certain prompts. Solomon tells us, "I, Solomon, on hearing this, sealed him, stretching out my hand against his chest." Where Solomon usually converses with the demons, he seems far more trigger-happy in this instance, and proceeds to bind Envy immediately. Whether he saw him as a threat is not known, but I believe it more likely that he deemed Envy as not being able to communicate that which he wanted to hear, or that he simply thought Envy was an idiot and needed to be bound in order to get the truth out of him. It is only when Envy is bound that Envy becomes far more liberal with his information. He declares, "Woe is me! Where am I come to? O traitor Orneus, I cannot see." It seems as if Envy becomes awakened after he is bound by Solomon. He becomes aware of more of his senses, and quickly comprehends the gravity of the situation, and that he is trapped, and in some place foreign. He also condemns the demon Orneus, who you will remember was ferrying other demons to Solomon in the beginning, and it is likely that Orneus is still doing this, and that he has somehow manipulated Envy into Solomon's presence. Envy, having been a simple demon, was more likely to trust and be led away by Orneus, but now that he is bound by Solomon and seems to gain some of the wisdom in which he craves, he recognizes Orneus as a traitor to both himself and his kind. Solomon tells him, "Tell me then, how thou dost manage to see." And of course, Solomon is baffled, given that Envy has no head, but is seemingly able to perceive that he is in a different place, and that he has been betrayed by Orneus in the first place. Envy replies, "By means of my feelings." Here it has been thought that the demon Envy navigates his surroundings by some sort of unexplainable sixth sense. He has no nose to smell, no eyes to see, no ears to hear, and no mouth to taste, but is still able to function. Some have thought that because he does not have a brain, his heart doubles as the nervous system, and is therefore less akin to logic and reason, but more geared towards intense emotion. It would explain why envy is such a big deal for him, because he wants so desperately to have a head that his heart amplifies this envious trait, making him resentful and scornful against those that do have one. Solomon then proceeds to ask him how he is even able to speak, and the demon replies, "I, O King Solomon, am holy voice, for I have inherited the voices of many men. For in the case of all men who are called dumb, I it is who smashed their heads when they were children and had reached their 8th day. Then when a child is crying in the night, I become a spirit and glide by means of his voice." Here we learn that envy, despite having a physical body, is entirely a voice. It also reveals that he has acquired many voices, but only those of men who are called dumb. Why he chooses only to acquire the voices of dumb men is not revealed, but it might be the case that these are the only voices he is capable of acquiring, and this furthermore makes him envious of those who are intellectuals, because again, he can never possess them. He also claims responsibility for either the demise of these dumb men or the reason why they are dumb in the first place, saying that he smashes their heads when they are children. So by this belief, whilst a child might be genetically predisposed to intelligence, he will still turn out to be slow-witted or even dense if envy gets his hands on him first. Envy also reveals that when he hears a child crying in the night, he becomes a spirit and he glides on the child's voice, implying that the sound of a child in pain or in need brings him joy, or brings him the ability of flight. He doesn't stop there though. He also reveals, "In the crossways also, I have many services to render, and my encounter is fraught with harm, for I grasp in all instant a man's head, and with my hands, as with a sword, I cut it off, and put it onto myself, and in this way, by means of the fire which is in me, through my neck, it is swallowed up. I it is that sends grave mutilations and incurables on men's feet, and inflicts sores." Here he is quite specific, and tells us that he decapitates men with his bare hands, and places their heads onto himself. Originally, I thought he might have done this to achieve that which he desires the most, that being a head. However, given that the head would be virtually useless at this point, it wouldn't hold much value to the demon. In fact, he'd probably have a hard time surgically attaching it in the first place. Furthermore, if he beheld the power to weld the severed head onto his neck and was able to infuse life into it, it would still not be his head. That head would still function, in this instance, with the brain of the victim, and so once more, envy does not get that which he desires. Therefore, this is why we see him swallow up the head with the fire that burns within him. He becomes so frustrated and hateful with the fact that he cannot even utilize a severed head that he destroys the head with flames that flow out of his neck. He also claims responsibility for placing wounds and incurable ailments upon the feet of men. Solomon becomes just as curious about this fire inside of him as we do. He asks, how does envy even discharge this fire, and from where does this fire even come from? Envy tells him, "From the day star, for here hath not yet been found the Alburian, to whom men offer prayers and kindle lights, and his name is invoked by the 7 demons before me, and he cherishes them." Here we learn that the fire inside of envy comes from this day star, but unfortunately he's not specific enough for us to come to a definitive conclusion as to what this star is. It's possible he is referring simply to the sun, in that the sun has the highest temperatures, and possibly the most likely place where such a fire could exist. He also makes reference to another demon in Alburion, a false god who men pray and burn candles for. But this demon is not mentioned again in the Testament, nor encountered by Solomon thereafter, Why Elburion is even mentioned is not known, but it could be that Envy achieves his flames by some sort of connection with Elburion. In any case, Envy also mentions the Seven Sisters, which we spoke about last time, and even acknowledges them, saying that Elburion cherishes them. Solomon proceeds to demand the true identity of Elburion, but Envy denies him, saying, "I cannot tell thee, for if I tell his name, I render myself incurable, but he will come in response to his name." Perhaps by this, Envy is revealing that this Elburion has some sort of hold over him. The only reason he doesn't disclose to Solomon is because Envy thinks it will render him incurable. The only ailment we know Envy has is that he is missing a head. So could it be that this Elburion has promised Envy a head that he can use, so long as his identity is kept secret? Unfortunately, we don't get to find out. Solomon appears to concede on this argument, and settles for knowing that which frustrates Envy the most, and Envy reveals that he is most frustrated by the fiery flash of lightning. This would imply that Envy is afraid of the elements, or that he fears the wrath of God, that which to him appears in the form of lightning. It could also be a throwback to the Greek mythology aspects that are so heavily featured in the Testament of Solomon, in that Zeus was the god of all gods, and Envy is most afraid of him, he who controls the lightning. After hearing this, Solomon proceeds to praise God and binds the demon Envy to the company of Beelzebub until the angels come to take them away. It is in Envy that we behold a most peculiar demon. He is perhaps one of the demons that we are able to relate to, in that envy is something we can all experience ourselves. Of course, the text dramatizes this envy and hyperbolizes it to the point that the demon kills people as a result of this. I suppose you might say it reflects the capacity for ill will that one may harbour for someone else should they feel envy. But it also highlights the hollowness of envy, in that by doing such a terrible thing, it brings one no closer to feeling satisfied. Envy himself admits he has killed many men and stolen their heads, but he is no more satisfied with his existence because of it. In fact, he only becomes far more frustrated when the heads he takes do not fit him. So by this, the authors of the story are trying to show us that actions committed out of envy are usually ill-fated, not just for the victim, but for us as well. As always guys, if you've enjoyed today's video, then don't forget to give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe. Until the next time guys.